"Senator, that's just nonsense." The words snapped across the chamber like a whip. JD Vance leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with dismissal, as if he had swatted away a child's question instead of a colleague's argument. For a moment, the Senate floor froze. Reporters at the back craned forward, pens poised above notepads. Cameras whirred softly, catching every flicker of expression. Elizabeth Warren did not move. Her gaze locked onto Vance with the unflinching. The intensity of someone who had seen arrogance before, dismantled it before, and was more than ready to do it again. The chamber grew quieter, aides trading uneasy glances, the kind of silence that feels like the breath before thunder. The smirk lingering on Vance's lips told its own story, confidence built not on fact, but on spectacle. He wanted the headlines. He wanted the viral clip. He wanted the insult to stand unchallenged. But Warren's pause was not weakness, it was precision. She let the weight of his words hang in the air, let the smugness of his interruptions simmer until every senator present knew something was about to happen. Then slowly, she leaned forward. Her voice, calm but cutting, sliced through the chamber. "The only nonsense here. Senators thinking you can silence the truth by speaking louder." Gasps rippled across the room. A low murmur followed staffers whispering, reporters scrambling to type, even a few senators shifting in their seats, as if they knew they were witnessing more than a routine exchange. The camera lights glared brighter, lenses tightening on Warren's face. Capturing the fire in her eyes, Vance tried to interject, but the moment had already slipped from his grasp. Warren's words lingered like an electric charge, and for the first time, his smirk faltered. This wasn't the scripted theater he had prepared for. This was something raw, unscripted, dangerous for him. The chamber seemed to tilt, energy surging toward Warren, as if the air itself had chosen a side. And as she prepared to speak again, every person in that room, ally, opponent, or neutral, bystander, leaned in. But that was only the beginning. What came next left even seasoned. Senators stunned. The silence after Warren's first strike was brief, but in that pause hung the weight of a larger struggle. This was not just Warren versus Vance. It was two competing visions for America colliding under the dome of the Senate. The stakes far greater than one heated exchange. Warren, voice steady, shifted the ground beneath their feet. Spoke of working families drowning under medical bills. Parents forced to choose between rent and prescriptions. Communities gasping under the chokehold of climate disasters. Biden's agenda, she insisted, was not some abstract set of policies, it was lifelines. Lifelines for the single mother waiting tables while caring for her child. Lifelines for the factory worker who gave 30 years only to see his pension vanish. Lifelines for the towns reduced to rubble by floods and fires that came faster and fiercer each year. This is about protecting the people who keep this country alive, Warren declared, her words echoing in the chamber. If defending families, healthcare, and our planet is nonsense, then Senator Vance has made clear where he stands, and it's not with the American people. Gasps again. She wasn't just debating policy. She was putting him on trial before the nation. But Vance was ready with his rebuttal. He leaned into his microphone, voice dripping with certainty, almost reveling in his role as the contrarian. What Senator Warren calls lifelines, I call shackles. Biden's agenda isn't rescuing America, it's dragging us backward. Don't need more government control. We don't need more spending, more mandates, more handouts that weaken our spirit. And the America I know stands tall on independence, not dependency. He punctuated his words with a sharp nod, scanning the chamber like a prizefighter who had landed a decisive punch. But the tension was palpable, because beneath the rhetoric, everyone knew the stakes were far higher than points scored in debate. This wasn't just about a bill or a budget. It was about whose story of America would triumph, the story of solidarity, justice, and shared responsibility. Or the story of rugged isolation, where those who falter are left behind. The cameras caught every flicker of emotion. Reporters scribbled feverishly, headlines already forming. Across the country, televisions carried the live feed into homes where families recognized themselves, and Warren's words are felt stirred by Vance's defiance. And as Warren prepared her next response, The narrator's truth hung in the air, like prophecy. What happened in this chamber wasn't just another debate. It was a battle over America's very identity. For Warren, the stakes were deeply personal. She had seen too many families crushed by systems designed to favor the powerful. For Vance, the stage was opportunity's chance to brand himself as the fearless challenger to a president's vision, 2 senators, 2 Americas. One chamber that could barely contain the clash, and as Warren leaned forward, the room braced because sparks were about to ignite. To understand the arrogance dripping from JD Vance's voice in that chamber, one must rewind the story. For years, Vance built himself as the boy from nothing, the voice of forgotten America. He packaged his life into a best-selling memoir hillbilly elegy and with it, secured not only a seat at Yale Law but also an image of authenticity few could question. He was the poor kid who rose, the Appalachian son who made it out. America loves those stories. America buys those stories. But here's the catch. Vance learned early that selling a story is not the same as living by it. His brand was outsider, yet the halls of Yale and the boardrooms of Silicon Valley became his training ground. He walked the red carpets of elite conferences while speaking of diners and broken-down factories. He spoke the language of ordinary people while writing checks and shaking hands with billionaires. Every step higher up the ladder, he made sure to polish the outsider mask a little more in that Senate chamber. Smug tone carried the residue of that contradiction. His voice was molded by years of debating in Ivy League halls, yet he wielded it as though he were speaking from a porch swing in Middletown, Ohio. He was fluent in both dialects, elite power and populist grievance, and he switched between them whenever it suited him. His supporters cheered his defiance of Biden's agenda, hearing in it the echo of a man who claimed to have lived their struggle. But beneath the populist slogans lay a pattern: votes and alliances that served the wealthy, the connected, the corporate. He spoke of Main Street while voting Wall Street. He railed against the establishment while taking its handouts. The skin of a rebel, but played the role of an insider perfectly. And in the chamber that day, his performance was all too familiar. Smirk tugging at his lips, the way his hand cut the air with dismissive waves, these were not the gestures of a man speaking truth to power. They were the tells of someone who believed he could outplay his opponent with condescension alone. He wanted Warren to appear shrill, unhinged, emotional. He wanted himself to look cool, calm, above it all. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were already visible, because arrogance has a way of blinding its bearer. Vance believed he could dominate the moment simply by belittling it. He believed the persona he had built, the poor boy who made it rich, the outsider who knew the inside game was unassailable. He believed his armor of contradictions was polished so brightly no one would see the rust beneath. But Warren had spent decades studying contradictions like his. She had battled bankers who sold themselves as innovators while bankrupting families. She had faced CEOs who called themselves job creators while cutting pensions. She had taken on power that hid behind glossy masks before, and she knew exactly where to strike. The irony was almost poetic. Vance, who once claimed to represent forgotten families, now stood against an agenda designed to give those families relief. He, the memoirist of hardship, dismissed healthcare protections as dependency. He, the self-made man, scoffed at climate measures meant to safeguard the very communities he had written about. His story had once inspired hope. Now was being used as a shield for hypocrisy. And in that Senate chamber, under the relentless lights of cameras and the unblinking stare of Elizabeth Warren, the contradictions began to shimmer more clearly. The outsider mask was slipping. The insider reality was showing. His hand gestures looked less commanding, more frantic, smirk less confident, more forced. The audience watching at home might not have known every detail of his journey from Yale to the Senate floor. But they could feel something was off. They could feel that this was a man too polished to be authentic, too rehearsed to be real. And authenticity, true authenticity, was what Warren carried like a weapon. The chamber had seen countless debates, countless exchanges of insults, and rehearsed talking points. But on this day, the contrast was too stark to ignore. The boy who sold himself as the voice of the voiceless now stood as a defender of power. The senator who had clawed her way into the fight for ordinary families was about to call him on it, and the smugness in Vance's tone, the dismissive tilt of his chin, the arrogance carved into every syllable, those would soon become the very tools of his undoing. But little did Vance know, his polished armor was about to crack. Elizabeth Warren's silence in that chamber was not hesitation. It was memory. Because long before the spotlight, long before the microphone, she had already walked through storms that would have broken many. She grew up in Oklahoma, in a family where every dollar mattered. Her father's heart attack nearly shattered them, not only in fear but in finances. Bills piled high, debt loomed heavy, and Warren, just a child then, watched her mother pull on her best dress and walk out the door to take a minimum wage job at Sears. That image seared itself into her, a reminder that dignity was fragile. And survival often came down to whether someone would extend a hand or slam the door. Warren knew struggle not as an abstraction but as a kitchen table reality. She knew the sound of hushed arguments over money, the silence of sacrifice when a family meal was skipped to stretch groceries. She knew what it meant to feel invisible. And she carried that invisibility with her, turning it into fire. As she grew older, that fire pushed her into teaching. Bankruptcy law wasn't glamorous, but it was a battlefield where families fought against giants, banks, corporations, and systems designed to keep them trapped. Warren didn't just teach the subject, she became one of the fiercest voices calling out how the system was rigged. Students remembered her passion, how she could turn dry statutes into stories of survival and injustice. She was relentless because the stakes weren't theoretical. Fate were her family's past and millions of families present. By the time she reached the Senate, Warren's reputation was carved in stone. She was the one who refused to bow, the one who questioned CEOs until their rehearsed smiles cracked. Wall Street executives dreaded her sharp, cutting questions. Tech titans accustomed to praise found themselves cornered by her command of detail and refusal to let arrogance go unchallenged. And hearing after hearing, her voice became the stand-in for the millions who would never sit in those rooms. But Warren's story wasn't only about professional battles. It was also about the grit of personal survival. As a young mother, she balanced raising children with climbing through academia, juggling lectures with late-night lesson plans. She spoke often of standing in classrooms while still worrying whether she'd make it home in time for dinner or whether the bills would stretch to cover another month. That story of a working mother wasn't a political talking point. It was her life. And it made her the kind of fighter who understood that policies were not just lines in a budget. They were lifelines or nooses. This dual identity professor. And mother, fighter, and nurturer gave Warren a rare authenticity. When she raised her voice against corporate greed, people believed her. When she demanded protections for families, people saw their own lives reflected back. She did not come to Washington to climb. She came to protect. And that made her dangerous to those who thrived on unchecked power. So when JD Vance tried to dismiss her as nonsense, he wasn't just underestimating her. He was underestimating the decades of fire she carried inside her. He was underestimating the little girl who had watched her mother take that Sears job to keep the family alive. He was underestimating the scholar who had faced down an entire financial industry. He was underestimating the senator who had made it her life's mission to ensure working families were never invisible again. Every glare she leveled across that chamber carried the weight of those memories. Every pause she allowed in her speech was sharpened by years of dissecting contradictions. Every word she chose had the precision of a woman who had spent her life fighting systems bigger than herself. And here's the irony. Warren did not need theatrics. She didn't need to wave her hands or raise her voice. Her story gave her authority, her scars gave her power. This history gave Warren a voice sharper than any Senate mic, and Vance was about to hear it. Because when her turn came, the tone of the room shifted. Permanently. The chamber, already taut with tension, began to pulse with a new electricity as JD Vance leaned forward, his voice rising just enough to carry the smugness across the floor. "Here we go again," he scoffed, his lips curling into a smirk. Another lecture from Senator Warren, You're great at preaching, Senator, but America doesn't need professors scolding them about how to live their lives. The jab was meant to sting, to paint her as condescending, out of touch, an ivory tower, intellectual, with no grasp on reality. He expected laughter, nods of approval, maybe even a ripple of applause from allies. Instead, the room fell uncomfortably. Silent cameras swung toward Warren, waiting for the strike. She didn't flinch, she didn't blink. When she spoke, her tone was calm, steady, but the steel in her words was unmistakable. Lecturing, I shot back, her eyes locking on his. You call it lecturing when someone refuses to let you get away with selling hypocrisy. You call it lecturing when someone refuses to let you rewrite the lives of working families into sound bites. The words landed heavy. Aides on both sides exchanged uneasy looks, whispering behind hands. Reporters scribbled frantically. The air in the chamber thickened, the clash no longer about policy, but pride, character, and truth. Vance tried to reassert control, leaning into his microphone with exaggerated patience. Senator, what you call truth, the rest of us see as tired slogans. Families don't need more government handouts, they need freedom. And yet every time you think Washington has the answers? His hand sliced the air, dismissing her arguments like dust. That's not leadership. That's dependency, disguised as compassion. This time Warren didn't wait. She'd cut across. Him, her voice firm, precise, every syllable carrying the conviction of lived experience. Don't you dare talk about dependency to people working 3 jobs just to pay for insulin. Don't you dare dismiss compassion as weakness when families are drowning because of policies written to protect people like you and the corporations you serve. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Vance blinked, momentarily caught off guard. By her directness, his smirk faltered, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch, every bead of sweat forming on his forehead. The clash no longer felt like debate. It felt like trial. Each word was evidence, each pause a verdict. The senators in their seats leaned forward, caught. In the current, even the pages and aides, normally expressionless, glanced at one another with raised brows, as if they knew they were witnessing something that would not stay confined within these marble walls. Warren's voice did not rise, but the gravity of her words pulled the chamber into her orbit. What you call freedom, Senator Vance, too often means freedom for corporations to exploit and profit while families are crushed. That's not freedom. That's servitude. The silence that followed was deafening. Every ear strained for the next exchange. Every heartbeat seemed to echo against the chamber's high ceilings. The clash had reached its boiling point. 2 visions of America locked in battle, one framed as dignity, the other as disdain. And in the midst of it, Warren's presence grew larger. Her fire uncontainable, her steadiness undeniable. And then the line that would echo across America. The chamber had become a theater of unease. For the better part of an hour, JD Vance had relished in his role, smirking, gesturing, spinning his rhetoric like a practiced showman. He thought he was winning. But now, the spotlight shifted, not with cameras, but with silence. Elizabeth Warren leaned forward, her papers untouched, her gaze locked on Vance. "Senator," she began, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through. The murmur of aides and reporters. The word hung like a warning. Vance straightened, preparing to parry. But what followed was no ordinary rebuttal. It was a systematic dismantling. "You call this agenda nonsense?" Warren asked, her voice steady. "Tell that to the families working 2 jobs and still unable to afford childcare. Tell it to the seniors who ration their medicine because pharmaceutical executives can't bear to shave a fraction off their profit margins. Tell it to the coal miners in Appalachia who breathe toxic air while CEOs collect bonuses large enough to buy islands." The air crackled. Vance smirked again, but this time the corners of his lips faltered. Warren continued, each sentence landing like a carefully aimed strike. "You claim the president is dragging America backward? Backward, Senator? Backward is a nation where people go bankrupt because their child gets sick? Backward is pretending. Climate change is a hoax, while wildfires swallow towns and hurricanes flatten coastlines. Backward is telling working Americans to tighten their belts, while billionaires buy their third yachts. That senator is backward. Whispers spread like fire through the chamber. Even seasoned staffers shifted, some scribbling notes furiously. Others simply staring. Vance leaned in, forcing a chuckle, trying to dismiss her with a wave of his hand. With all due respect, Senator, you're just lecturing again. The phrase had worked for him before, a favorite of men who wanted women to shrink in rooms of power. But Warren did not shrink. She straightened. Her voice dropped, deliberate. Commanding? Lecturing? No, Senator, I'm not lecturing. I'm reminding you. In this chamber, who pays the price when politicians like you sneer at lectures? She paused. The silence that followed was thick, weighted, alive. It's the people who never get invited to your fundraisers. It's the people whose voices never echo in this marble hall because they don't have a PAC check to hand you. It's the people you claim to fight for while voting against them every chance you get. A gasp rippled through the rows. Vance's grin wavered, his jaw tightening. He tried to interrupt, but Warren raised her hand slightly, not to silence him, but to hold the floor with a force greater than gavel or rulebook. You wrote a memoir about growing up in hardship, about escaping poverty. And yet, every time you stand here, you vote in ways that make it harder for the next child born in a town like yours to climb out. You talk about forgotten Americans, but you've made a career out of forgetting them the moment it inconveniences. Your party line, that's not leadership, that's betrayal. The chamber erupted in murmurs. A few senators exchanged knowing looks. Others avoided meeting Warren's eyes altogether. Vance shifted, his face flushed, his hand tapping nervously against the desk. Warren pressed on, her tone unwavering, her cadence rising and falling with the precision of someone who had spent years in classrooms, boardrooms, and hearing rooms. Knowing exactly how to hold attention, you mock climate policy as elitist. Do you know what's elitist, Senator? Pretending the children who cough through asthma attacks in polluted neighborhoods don't matter? You call healthcare expansion a socialist scheme. Do you know what's socialist, Senator? Taxpayers bailing out banks while families drown in medical debt? You rail against investing in education. Do you know what's radical, Senator? Expecting a generation to compete in a global economy while saddled with crushing student loans? Sentence struck like a hammer. Gasps punctuated her words. Some aides who had been whispering earlier now sat frozen. The cameras zoomed closer. Their operator sensing that history was unfolding in real time, Vance tried again to muster a retort. Fumbling with his notes, his hand gripping the edge of his desk. Senator, but Warren cut through, her voice now resonant, echoing off the chamber walls. No, you've had your turn. Now listen, it wasn't a plea, it was a command. Warren drew a breath, letting the weight of the moment build. She looked not just at Vance, but at every senator seated, every camera broadcasting, every American beyond the chamber walls. This isn't about you, Senator Vance. It's not about me. It's about whether this country belongs to the people who work hard and play fair, or to the wealthy few who think democracy is just another commodity they can buy. President Biden's agenda isn't dragging America backward. To keep America from being dragged under by the greed of those who confuse power with entitlement? The words echoed, and for a moment, the chamber was silent enough to hear the soft hum of the lights. Then Warren leaned closer, her voice sharpening to a blade's edge. So when you sneer at working families, when you wave away the struggles of immigrants, when you pretend justice is a lecture and fairness is a weakness, remember this: America is watching, and they can see right through you. The final blow came not with volume, but with clarity. She leaned back, her eyes never leaving Vance, her voice low but resonant. You don't get to decide the future of this country by silencing voices that terrify you. You don't get to mock compassion as weakness, and you sure don't get to call dignity nonsense. Not here, not now, not ever. The chamber froze. Vance opened his mouth, but no sound came. His polished armor had cracked. His smirk had vanished. He sat there, red-faced, his forced smile trembling under the weight of the silence. And then came the moment. The mic drop line, calm, clear. "Final, Senator," Warren said. "America deserves better than your contempt, and whether you like it or not, they're going to get it." The silence that followed was electric. Reporters typed furiously. Aides glanced at one another in disbelief. Senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The chamber felt less like a debate and more like a reckoning. Narrator. Each word landed like a hammer, until the chamber itself seemed to fall silent in reverence. Vance's smirk was gone, his armor cracked, and Warren's voice lingered in the air, undeniable, unforgettable. But outside those chamber doors, the reaction was even louder. The chamber doors swung open, and what had begun as a clash inside. Those marble walls detonated into the outside world like a thunderclap. Within minutes, the confrontation was everywhere. Clips of Warren's final words flooded Twitter feeds, Instagram reels, and TikTok edits. The hashtag Warren vs. Vance surged past 1 million mentions before the senators had even returned to their offices. Close behind came another #agenda clash, a banner under which thousands of Americans staked their sides in the fight. The viral machine worked at breakneck speed. Someone looped Warren's mic drop line. "America deserves better than your contempt," over a hip-hop beat. Within hours, it was a TikTok sound with tens of thousands of remixes. Young activists lip-syncing Warren's words. Immigrants, proudly stitching videos about their family's struggles. Even celebrities reposting it with captions like, "This is the fire we needed." On Instagram, memes erupted like wildfire. One showed Vance's faltering smile photoshopped onto a collapsing statue. Another cast Warren as a cinematic heroine framed with glowing text, "Not here, not now, not ever." Twitter turned into a gladiator's arena, some cheering Warren as a fearless defender, others fuming at what they called performative grandstanding. But the sheer velocity of the content was undeniable. The news cycle followed suit, desperate to catch the wave before it left them behind. CNN's primetime panels replayed the exchange frame by frame, their analysts leaning in, savoring Warren's rhythm, dissecting Vance's silence. MSNBC branded it the moment that shook the chamber. Even Fox couldn't resist. Their hosts scrambled to spin, portraying Warren as condescending, Vance as a victim of liberal bullying. Yet the split screen told another story. Warren's composure versus Vance's flustered stammer. Podcasts pounced on the clash. Progressive voices hailed Warren's words as a blueprint for fighting back against what they called toxic populism. Conservative pundits decried the hysteria, yet their listeners clicked in droves, driving ratings higher with every outrage-fueled replay. But it wasn't just pundits, it was the people. Parents shared clips with their teenagers saying, "This is what standing up looks like." Workers on break watched the video in fast food parking lots, nodding in solidarity. Immigrant families circulated translations, adding captions like, "She spoke for us too." The moment didn't just live online. It seeped into conversations at kitchen tables, classrooms, union halls, in group chats across the country. Late-night comedians seized the moment too. Monologues opened with Warren's takedown, punchlines less about Warren herself and more about Vance's stumbling attempt at recovery. One host joked, "If you listen closely, you can hear JD Vance Googling how to smile naturally." At 2 a.m., the audience roared, not just at the joke, but at the shared cultural recognition that something historic had been witnessed. For Warren's supporters, it felt like vindication. Years of watching her challenge Wall Street titans and question corporate CEOs now crystallized into a single confrontation. The clips made them feel part of a movement, part of something larger than just one Senate hearing. The comments beneath each viral post were more than applause. They were testaments. "She said what we've been screaming for years. This is why we fight." Finally, someone stood up without flinching. But the shockwaves cut both ways. It's conservative. Groups mobilized overnight, firing off fundraising emails that painted Warren as the face of liberal arrogance. Vance's allies rallied to reframe him as a truth-teller unfairly maligned, yet even their messaging betrayed unease. The footage was too damning, the optics too powerful. No slogan could erase the image of Vance's forced smile crumbling under Warren's unrelenting words. Meanwhile, on college campuses, students turned Warren's quotes into rallying cries on posters and digital flyers. Activist groups seized the momentum, organizing town halls and live streams under the banner of #AgendaClash. They weren't just replaying the debate, they were translating it into action. Petitions circulated, calls to lawmakers spiked. The sense was palpable. People weren't just watching history, they were living it, were participating in it. By the end of the week, confrontation dominated search engines, trending lists, and cable rundowns. Clips were replayed so often that even those who hadn't watched the Senate hearing in full could recite Warren's final lines. The exchange had moved beyond politics into the bloodstream of culture itself. Yet beneath the frenzy, the hashtags, the edits, the ratings boost, something deeper stirred. Because the battle between Warren and Vance wasn't just about two senators clashing over Biden's agenda. It wasn't just another viral moment for the endless churn of the internet. No, it was a mirror, reflecting the questions America could no longer avoid asking. Who truly defines this country's future? Who pays the price when leaders sneer at compassion? Who benefits when power masquerades as populism? As the cameras moved on, as the hashtags burned bright, then began to fade, one truth became clear. The viral frenzy was only the surface. Behind it, a lesson was waiting to be uncovered. Beneath the noise of trending hashtags and the churn of the news cycle, something more enduring was taking shape. The clash between Warren and Vance had become more than a viral spectacle. It was a parable, a living reminder of what dignity and conviction can mean in the face of arrogance. Warren's words had traveled far beyond the marble walls of the Senate. They found their way into living rooms where families gathered around muted televisions, subtitles flashing her lines like scripture. They echoed in classrooms where teachers paused to explain to their students why a single senator's courage mattered. They reached immigrant households where parents whispered translations to their children, explaining she is fighting for us too. And it wasn't just the message that resonated, it was the manner in which it was delivered. Warren didn't meet contempt with contempt. She didn't raise her voice to drown Vance out. Instead, she wielded calmness as a weapon sharper than any insult. Every pause, every pointed word, was a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands unshaken until arrogance collapses under its own weight. In that contrast lay the moral heart of the moment. Vance, with his smirks and interruptions, embodied a politics of dismissal, a style that thrives on belittling opponents, reducing debates to theater, and treating the people as props. Warren, in return, embodied a politics of dignity, a style that refuses to forget the people outside those chamber walls who live. The consequences of every sneer and shrug, the lesson wasn't subtle. America had been reminded that leadership is not measured by who can shout the loudest or land the sharpest insult. Leadership is measured by who carries the voices of the unseen into the spotlight, who dares to speak for those who cannot walk through the chamber doors themselves. And this moment mattered because it touched something deeper in the national conscience. At its core, the Biden agenda Warren defended was not just a collection of policy points. It was an affirmation that government exists to lift, not to crush, to shelter, not to exploit, to bring people closer together, not to drive them apart. That is why the clash lingered. It wasn't just about Warren versus Vance. It was about whether America would allow cynicism to masquerade as strength, or whether it would reclaim the values that built its promised justice, fairness, and compassion. In the days that followed, many who had felt invisible found themselves reflected in Warren's words. The working father who had juggled 3 jobs. The grandmother who had rationed insulin to make it through the month. The student crushed by debt before their career had even begun. Each heard a piece of themselves in her voice. And yet, the resonance of the moment wasn't only for progressives or activists. Even among those who disagreed with Warren politically, some confessed to feeling the weight of her composure. The clash revealed that dignity, when wielded with clarity, can cut through ideology and remind people of a shared humanity. It became clear, when arrogance tries to dominate the stage, the dignity has the power to steal the show. The moral, then, was simple but profound. America cannot afford leaders who sneer at compassion, who dismiss justice as weakness, who confuse cruelty with strength. What it needs, and what Warren demonstrated, is leadership rooted in empathy, courage, and truth. And though Vance had sought to undermine, he inadvertently gave Warren the very stage from which her message could soar. By trying to silence her, he amplified her. By smirking, he revealed his fragility. By interrupting, he made her patience louder. That her history was what sharpened her voice beyond any Senate microphone. And so, the clash ended not with a shout, but with a lesson. That in America, the strongest voices are not the loudest, but the ones that carry the weight of justice. When her turn came, the tone of the room shifted permanently, and so the chamber fell silent, but the echoes carried far beyond. What began as a heated clash between Elizabeth Warren and JD Vance had become something larger, a reminder of the choice before America: arrogance or dignity, contempt or compassion, politics of sneers or a politics of service. The title of this moment will linger because it captured something rare. Elizabeth Warren versus JD Vance. Sparks fly over Biden's agenda. But what viewers witnessed wasn't just sparks, it was fire meeting steel. It was the resilience of a leader who refused to bow to derision, who turned interruption into inspiration. For millions watching, Warren's voice wasn't simply her own. It was a chorus of families, workers, immigrants, and dreamers who, too, often feel silenced. It was proof that truth, when spoken with courage, cannot be mocked into silence. And that's why this story doesn't end in the chamber. It lives on in the choices each of us makes, whether to share, to speak, to stand, whether to let contempt rule or to insist on dignity as the measure of leadership. Because in America, truth doesn't just survive interruptions, it rises above them. If you felt that rise, if you believe dignity speaks louder than arrogance, then this is your moment to stand with it. Share this story. Be part of the movement that refuses to be silenced. And if you're ready for more battles where truth takes the stage, subscribe now. Because this was not the last clash, and the fights ahead will need every voice. History is still being written. And the question is simple: whose side will you be on when the sparks fly again?